So what we're going to start talking about now is personal action plans. A personal action plan, you've seen the results of a couple of personal action plans. And I thought I would talk for just a couple of minutes and make some suggestions and give some guidance, and then maybe a couple of people will offer just a couple of moments about their own experience with this. So this is really up to you. This is some time. I have about half an hour to start working on this. It's something that unfolds with time. It's a suggestion, not a requirement. So it's an opportunity to do something, to start focusing on what it is that you would like to undertake on your own as you leave here. And so in that regard, there are a couple of thoughts that I would offer to you as you think about it. It can be small or large, it can be personal, or it can be connected with your business. Like Linda was connected with transformation in her business and ongoing, or it can be a personal one. Matt, are you here? Yes. Can I talk a little bit about our conversation at breakfast?
Sure.
Okay, so Matt's a broker. He's a commercial real estate broker, and he is working with a group of people. What was the community? Which community were you talking about?
Brighton Beach, Coney Island.
Brighton Beach, Coney Island, southern part of Brooklyn. I don't know if you all know that area. If you don't, you should get down. It's a fascinating part of America. A lot of different groups of people who would feel very uncomfortable in this room. And much as we might like to have them, the idea of green is not something that's very clear. They're definitely into green, but it's money, not green sustainability. So how do you talk to people like that about that? How do you make the practical comment about somebody who owns buildings, who's not thinking about this, and talk with them in a way that helps them rethink the way they run their building? So again, that's an exploration that could be, just as an example, a personal action plan that would then bring back that information. It's not just about sending out, helping those people think it through, but what works? What kinds of communication work with those folks? And then bringing it back next year and talking about what we've learned, or during the course of the year sharing it. So one of the things that comes up with the mind is when you come up with a personal action plan, or at least when I do, is all the reasons why it's not going to happen, why it's not going to work, or why it's not really a good idea, why it's going to be awkward, why all the problems and challenges. This is what the mind does. It creates that. So I would suggest, as you develop your personal action plan, and those, you create the possibility of what you might accomplish, and then notice what comes up and just jot them down. The obstacles that you identify are actually the learning opportunities. The opportunities to interact with the world around you and to alter both your own behavior and the behavior of other people, and to find ways around it. So at this point, you don't have to solve all of these obstacles, just list them. And it's fine to have obstacles. If it were easy, there wouldn't be much fun in it, there wouldn't be much point in it. The point is to take on things that bring about change, which means there will be things that need to be changed, which means there'll be obstacles. So as you identify the obstacles, you're identifying the points of where you're going to learn and where you're going to have an opportunity to really have some juice in the personal action plan. Be flexible. There's no need to set up a plan over the next couple of days and then next week stick to it. I am going to do this because I wrote it down and I committed to, and I'm going to do it. No, this is, it depends on the analogy you want. It's open field, running for daylight. It's like a garden. Not every plant flourishes. So you plant a bunch of plants, some don't flourish. Oh, that doesn't work here so well, so next season I'm going to plant this kind of plant. And you start to learn what works and what doesn't work. And so it's okay to be an opportunist. I think Linda gave us a great example of that. Well, this is not in our plan, but everybody's calling us up and giving us money. Huh? Let's use it. Okay? So there are things that happen. It doesn't have to be quite as dramatic as that. It can be the little opportunities that come along that you suddenly say, aha, wasn't in my plan, but that will move me in the direction of the possibility that I'm creating. And find allies. You'll find allies in this room. As you talk about this with other people, you'll find people who resonate with what you're doing and who could be very helpful. Maybe it's an email buddy or a Facebook buddy or somebody you want to talk to once a month and just check in. How's your project going? How's my project going? Any suggestions, things like that. Use the network. Or it might be somebody in your office. It might be a spouse or a partner. It might be your kids. Go home and tell them about it. It's a very dangerous thing to do. I've done that. I have a son. He's ferocious. So, Dad, how's it coming? I'll get back to you, Knox. So find allies that will both support you, inform you on, and help you as you do it. And then I just offer at the end here what I would call the 3 Ps. One is be patient. Take your time. Dennis was wonderful last night. See here, where's Dennis? Oh, there you are. So remind us how long you've been working at this?
The South Face is 33 years.
33 years. So imagine what you can accomplish in 33 years in terms of the change. We're 3 years into this project that Jonathan is, this magical mystery tour that Jonathan's created for us and getting us into. We can already start to see the impact it's having as people come back and report on what they've been doing over the course of the last year. So allow it to unfold over time. So that's the first P, be patient. Number 2, be persistent. Just keep at it. You don't have to do everything about it every day, but have a list, have a timeline, have a way to check in, have your allies, and just keep plugging away at it as the opportunities arise. And then the third one I'd offer is be practical. You don't have to save the world. You're not called to save the world. You're called to do the best you can in the area that's given to you to work in. I mean, that was a wonderful comment by Mother Teresa at one point. She was asked, you're not going to be able to save the world. But, you just have your one little group here. How can you do that? She said, God didn't call me to save the world. He called me to do the best I could with the people who come before me for me to serve. So that's all we all can do. So be practical. Don't throw yourself off a cliff. Don't go rushing into your office and say, I found the light. You might not even want to tell them that you have any light. You might want to work in another area that's more practical. So anyway, with that, we'll have some time now to start writing down in these wonderful echo books that Jonathan has given us, and start thinking about what it is that you might start to do. But as you start to think about that, Dana, you had a personal action plan last year, didn't you? You want to give us a couple of moments of what your experience with that's been, good, bad, or indifferent?
It's been great, actually. One of the simple things I had in my plan was I speak a lot. Not that you can tell, but I do a lot of public speaking. Have a lot of room for improvement there. But and I realized I wasn't using those opportunities to really talk about climate change, to talk about behavior change. I was more always responding to what I was asked to talk about and explaining our program. And so I decided that I was going to use every single opportunity to share the wedge, to share the sort of power that we each have to make changes in our behavior that can help our entire planet. And so it's been a lot of fun. I've been sort of collecting stories and data and tweaking presentations to include that either at the beginning, at the end, or at some point. But it's been good.
Great, thank you. My guess is, from having done some of that myself, is that when you start talking about that, there's a surprising amount of resonance. People want to hear people talk about this, particularly in this context. So what might have seemed like a little off the wall turns out to be something that's a real contribution and a real addition to your talks. Who else would like to just share some reactions to it that hasn't had a chance to? Anybody?
What topics do you typically speak about, and how did you work that in?
Good question.
Yeah, great. I mostly speak to audiences of of real estate practitioners, mostly those operating in the affordable housing space. And so I have an easy in, actually, to talk about it, because a lot of the work we do is about greening affordable housing, and we've been focusing this year on resident engagement. And so as I talk about some of the work we're doing to engage residents living in properties, then that's an easy sort of phase into what we can do personally to change behavior in our own lives as we're trying to make a difference in our professional lives.
So again, what she's doing is being practical. She's talking to people where there is the opportunity. She's being opportunistic, finding the opportunities. She's being practical, talking to, not to people who don't want to hear it, but who are just going to groan, but people who do, who are at least open to it. And so again, one of the great indicators, and Jason's been pointing to this, is you can tell if you're really on track if it's fun. Fun is actually an underestimated working tool. And if you're having fun, and you care, you're probably on track for your plan. So with that, then we turn over and you've got some paper, do some thinking, spend some time, and then we'll move on to the next example. We're going to have to practice intentional communication. What that is means that you're going to report on an hour's conversation in 3 minutes. So we're going to hit the 1 or 2 high points of your conversation. So those of you who are reporting, get ready. And I'll just go along in any particular order unless somebody wants to volunteer to go first. Yes, okay, we have a volunteer to go first. Excellent, intentional communication.
So our group talked about really just actually we talked about a lot of different things, some of which didn't touch on this issue of employees, but we'll sort of edit those out. So the top 3 things that our group talked about was, we converge on this idea that ultimately, obviously, the goal of all of the exercises that we're talking about is to change the corporate culture. And to be able to do that, you have to sort of get buy-in both at the top and at the sort of worker bee level. And the barriers, to that, some of the ones that we listed were, people have messaging fatigue, so people see initiatives come and go, over the years, and so then you're like, well, is this really something that that the organization is going to stick with, or is it something that is going to last for the next 3 months and then go away? So sort of getting through that cynicism or just fatigue, and then this idea that everybody is at work and we all have our working priorities, and so trying to make sure that whatever the green commitment or the goals that you commit to are don't get crowded out by the other priorities. And so some of the ideas that we came up with around how you might overcome these barriers had to do with, first of all, building relationships. So Valerie from Wedco gave this really great example about how Wedco had developed a softball team. And it's not explicitly a green activity, but it's an activity that brings together people from all different parts of the organizations, and these are folks who often who work in different boroughs and wouldn't otherwise have social interaction. So sort of creating relationships as a fundamental base, and then we also talked about creating visibility. So even if you haven't quite gotten to where you want to go with your greening program, being able to have something visible that shows that you've made these commitments, so whether through signage or whatever. And then trying to make these activities sort of fun and cool rather than feeling like another responsibility on top of the work that you have to do. The second point that we discussed was the issue of identifying champions and then effectively supporting them, and so that as you go through a trajectory of change, you have to be resilient, against the pushback that's going to come from various corners, and you have to be able to stand strong until you actually get sort of broader buy-in. And to be able to do that, perhaps one of the things that if you have a green committee, the kind of support that the green committee could provide is sort of providing cover for individuals who want to take personal initiative in some way, and then secondly, providing oversight and accountability so that initiatives aren't just sort of starting up and then fizzling out without ever reporting back. Can I add one final item? And the final item had to do with sort of, how to create space so that people are able to talk about personal commitments. Depends on your organizational culture, but there are definitely places where it's kind of not, considered professional to be getting too personal about, your behavior or, definitely your preference about other people's behavior. So sort of, thinking about like how do you create space so that you can talk about personal commitments in an appropriate way.
Great. Thank you very much. So who's next? Okay. Now, if you're going to talk about some of the same things that we're just talking about, you don't have to repeat them. Just say, yeah, well, our friend speaks for us. Our friends speak for us, and here's what we would add to the conversation.
Okay. So we did talk about many of the same things, not all of the same things that the first group talked about. The challenge that some of us are facing, we talked about my organization, the Community Builders, which is about 400 people scattered over 15 states. And so how do you create a kind of bottom-up or middle-up climate of change in the organization around sustainability issues in a way that will resonate with senior leadership? I think that Linda's example was phenomenal and inspiring. Quite frankly, I wish my CEO was as eloquent and passionate about the environmental issues. He's got other things that he is eloquent and passionate about, and so part of the challenge is how do you align with those interests in a way to make green a natural extension of what the priorities of the organization are. And we talked about a couple of strategies. Start with a small project that can help him look good, help the management look good, help the organization look good. Actually, we have a wonderful opportunity, and again, thanks to our friends at Enterprise here, we have $25,000 to do some capacity building training at one of our sites in Chicago. So Dana, I'll talk with you about that a little bit more at the end, but boy, $25,000, we do $100+ million projects, but you got to start somewhere, and so I think we have an opportunity in that with the right partners. So Enterprise is a terrific partner. The Center for Neighborhood Technology in Chicago is a wonderful partner in that, and have it work and have it align with the top interests. And also find a way to make life easier, as Linda described. Make life easier both for the CEO and for the frontline property manager, so that they're not having to fix systems or they're not having to take maintenance calls every week around stuff. There was another example of a woman at Vornado Realty Trust who did this kind of guerrilla approach to finding projects and priorities. To the point that all of a sudden the CEO there kind of found religion on this stuff because he recognized the business value in it. Second set of things we talked about was creating a group of committed people around this, and a little bit around what Bonmi was saying. The green team is broadly representative of the roles there. Again, a little bit of Jason's guerrilla tactics that he's used is always helpful. Amit, in his role at HUD, talked about the sustainability officers that HUD has created. He's not one of them because that's his full-time job, but HUD has a series of about 60 or 70 people who take about 5% of their time to be sustainability evangelists, I guess you want to call it. People whose day job is something different, but then work on sustainability for part of the year, and that's kind of an exciting concept. And finally, struggling to identify resources and priorities. We had HUD, a federal agency, we had my organization, a large nonprofit, and then we had 3 sort of education advocacy nonprofits there. And so I asked them, are you in green space? And they said, well, we're in even better space. We're in free space. And so even though it's not green, how do you balance that? So that's kind of where we ended up.
Great. Thanks, David. Next. Yes, Joanne. Again, just adding on instead of repeating.
Okay, what we realized is you need to start by knowing what the commitment to green is within the organization, both at the management level, at the board level, at the staff level. And one of the challenges, what happens if the commitment is in the middle of the organization, not in the leadership, and how do you deal with that? We also realized you need to start by framing why it matters before you go into how do we implement it. And we talked about in the nonprofit environment, it's a tough time right now. How do you look at this compared to all the other priorities? And the answer we came up with is it needs to be two things. It needs to be aligned with mission so that it's not an instead of, it's a how-to. And that it's something that is also part of building a better world, which is what a nonprofit's about. And on the business side, the idea that it's both linked to business bottom line and linked to being a good corporate citizen and has benefits in multiple ways. The idea that if it's in the culture, you absorb it. We talked about how organizations start with it happening in one corner and then spread it, and that you start with the behavior change and the attitudes will follow, which is a theme that we've heard here. And you want to frame it so that it's both in the interest of the organization and in the interest of just being a good person in the world and making the world a little better, that both beats are really important. Challenge if you have old infrastructure, challenge if you think you need to hire somebody for it, and where you get the resources. The idea that you need to choose targets that are appropriate to your organization and its values, its mission, and the stage that it's in, and have peer support within the organization so that people at the same level are supporting themselves and supporting each other and across organizations, and that you want stewards within all levels of the organization. The idea of incorporating healthy living as a concept, looking at the food people are eating, the Grayston example of being able to have an hour's nutritionist time change how the kids in daycare were getting fed. So looking for opportunities like that, and that also shows a commitment to a healthy environment for staff, which lays a base for them being thoughtful about the environment in general. You want to celebrate successes that have happened at all levels of the organization. And I think the beat we're hearing over and over again is start small, start with low-hanging fruit, build a success, and then you build the muscle to do more.
Thank you. Next, yes?
So our group kind of did a deeper dive on the success factors for champions. And I think it started out with a bit of an anecdote of a large company that won't be named, that in one regional headquarter had no green champion. And as a result, none of the company's green practices got implemented. So we picked up on that, and I think we picked up too on the success that Linda's had in getting some of her staff to become champions. And so we wanted to kind of, I think we just kind of naturally went down that path of trying to understand what that took, picking up on what the USGBC example of having a dedicated person, needing to motivate staff, and that the people who would do that best if they were closer in age and demographic to the staff. We started talking about one particular case study with Ginkgo Properties, where one person within the company came up and was very adamant in promoting a no smoking campaign against sort of all against potential objections from senior management, and ultimately succeeded. And so the importance of persuasiveness in champions was something that really came up amongst our group, that they understand marketing, how to structure a story, have the personal touch, that they be people, that this is actually way more important than green qualifications or credentials. And so actually we discussed actually looking for people and then training up the green side, rather than trying to do the other way around. Talked about challenges in small companies of coming up with these champions when you don't have enough resources, and the challenge of funding. And then we ended off by getting on the topic of split incentives and just how the benefits of many of these different programs accrue to the residents or to the owners, and not to the property managers in the middle. And something needs to be done about that.
Thank you. Wonderful. Next?
Hi. Well, I was part of, I think I would summarize as being kind of the affordable and supportive housing group. So there were some interesting things that came up in addition to what everyone else has addressed here. But I think we talked a lot about how, a lot of these organizations are so busy focusing on kind of the mission-driven work that in a way there's a perception that kind of gives us a free pass, and also that capacity building is difficult because some of these organizations are very small and you're focused on often outreach to so many other organizations that you tend to focus on the impact you can have there rather than within your own office. And so and there's also the issue of not wanting these people to burn out. So I guess we really talked about the importance of continuing to challenge ourselves kind of within these organizations to think green when we had the chance, And as Linda mentioned, kind of really focusing on, maintaining the interest in the long term and making sure that being green kind of becomes integrated in daily life and daily work. And also finding humor and forgiving ourselves for when we print one-sided instead of double-sided, and just basic small strategies, even talking about kind of green event planning and how to integrate that into events. And everything else was probably covered by the other groups.
Right. I think our group also talked about a lot of topics that were covered by some of the other groups. One of our big things that we talked about a lot was the necessity of having flexibility to let information move up and down the sort of chain of command within the organization. We got a good example from Jennifer about having the maintenance staff try out green cleaning supplies and being able to give that feedback. This product doesn't really work that well, or it takes 3 times as long, and enabling them both to have discussions among the peers about how well and less well things were working, and then letting that information get back up to the organization to give everybody to allow that information to get out. And that also tied in with the idea of allowing empowerment, again at all levels, to have people feel like they're having a voice, having a say in the way these policies are getting implemented in their organization. And then that also is related to this idea of using trial and error, not being afraid to try something out to see if it works, and then if it doesn't, you should try something else. That's the way these things tend to go. And we also touched on the idea of how important it is to have these metrics to be able to, once you do use the trial and error to see what's happening, it's important to be able to identify whether it's succeeded and what you need to do to move forward.
Great, thank you. So the final group, there's one more group out there. They're both the humble group, but they're also the smart group because so much has been covered. That's right.
It's kind of true. You guys all touched on a lot of the things that we talked about in our group as well, so I'm not going to repeat them. But one thing that I will mention that kind of affects how you understand your population and how you choose your cheerleader, or how you find your cheerleaders actually, is how you define the buckets of what's important to people for sustainability in that organization. And for some, it's transportation and energy costs, and for others, like Patty was mentioning, for her group, people care more about leasing and communications and marketing and things like that. And so understanding who your employees are and just, why do they work there, what do they care about, and then targeting that to how you approach sustainability seems to be really important. And then that's how you identify your cheerleaders, how you support them, and then how you implement programs. So everything else was pretty much covered.
Thanks, Haley. We got a couple of minutes for any reactions or thoughts that any of you may have. One thought that I had is that what began to occur for me is that there is a set of best practices. It's not rocket science. There's a certain amount of things that you do. You look for champions, you look for people, and all the things that you mentioned, because each of the groups started to go down much the same things with flavors of, different flavors and things like that. So there's a way of doing this that you all have identified for your organizations. It's very interesting. It's just knowing the knowledge and then being able to share that. So any other thoughts, reflections by anybody? Yes.
We talked about this a little bit in my group, but it is maybe slightly off topic, but still I think relevant, which is the idea of this culture of reuse and helping people reuse stuff and share stuff. And so I think about this from the Preservation Green Lab perspective because I think about reusing buildings, but in my own sort of other life as a property owner and a property manager, I think about how can people share appliances, how can they share power tools, thinking about ways that, so that we're avoiding, more investment of embodied resource, but also saving our tenants time and money. But it's an uphill battle, obviously, because we have this acquisitive sort of aspirational culture where we all want our own shiny new version of whatever it is. So I almost feel like it's harder than the operational stuff, which sort of doesn't have these as much class baggage almost in a way, because I think even with my lower income tenants, that there's even more of a desire to have, the really shiny new thing. And so we as leaders have to really walk the talk on that one, reusing stuff, sharing stuff. So it's another sort of dimension to this that we haven't really been talking about.
It's very interesting. It occurs to me it's the zip car approach to life. So, but we can move that around in all kinds of different ways. Any other last minute reflections? It's a hungry group. No, okay. One more comment and then we'll all go to lunch. But you are.
Just a very short comment that what I've been thinking about through this discussion process is how we all have blind spots depending on where we're coming from. I know in our group, there were, somebody commented about using these approaches to engage employees, and I said, well, to me, that's just not, this is very easy. It's not rocket science to get people employed. On the other hand, building a green building to me would be rocket science because I'm coming from the psychology end of things. And I just think that this is something that I'm thinking about in terms of how does this apply to the people that we work with? How can we be more conscious about where people are coming from and the blind spots they have, and how we can communicate more effectively and engage them more effectively where they're coming from.
And the corollary to that is how can we be more attuned to our own blind spots? And how can we ask people to help us see our blind spots, which are the hardest things to see?